I don't even really want to be like a woman in comics. I'm just like, I'm an artist and this is the medium that I'm working in. And, I don't really like care how I'm celebrated and read as long as I'm celebrated and read.
Lounging, son.
Welcome to the Comic Lounge. Today I have another awesome interview for you guys. I'm talking to cartoonist Katie Skelly. I'm a new fan of her work. I learned about her from Cartoonist Kayfabe. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of them. Jaime Hernandez, I know that you guys are friends, and I saw you on there and I was like, who is she? I want to know more. And thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I've been checking out the channel and it all looks really good.
Oh, thank you so much. So first off, how have you been? How have you been these past few months during, the pandemic? Has it affected your work? Does it, like, how does the outside stuff affect,
Mhm.
your work?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm doing all right. I'm holding up okay. Health-wise, I'm good, and the people that are close to me are good. So I'm just like really grateful for that. As far as work, I'm also like still have my job, thank God. So still hanging in there. I've been able to work from home for the last 5 months, and it's been really great because literally like the weekend before New York shut down was the weekend that I turned Maids in. So it was like I was rushing and going crazy, and like my immune system must have been like at 0% at that point. So
Mhm.
I'm really lucky that I got to like be at home after that and like relax a little bit and kind of get myself back together. I was a little resentful because I was like, so I have all this free time now and I can't see anyone. I can't do anyone. I can't work on the book anymore. Like it's done. It's out Fantagraphics. Um, but I've been really, really lucky. And so I find that when I finish like a long-term project, I have all this like excess energy. It's kind of like after you do a really long run, you can't just like sit down and chill out. So I ended up putting together a new Oracle deck, which is kind of like a tarot deck, and that's going to come out in a couple weeks. And yeah, I've just been like trying to put together the next project, and I've been having fun doing my own stuff, like just doing my own little like test animations, trying out like different pens and different colors for comics. So it's actually been quite nice for me, and I'm kind of a recluse naturally, so it's going okay.
I joked with my wife. I said, I've been training for this my whole life. You know what I mean? Like, I like to read. So for me, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I would love to be able to go and do stuff. Um, but, I don't mind it. If it means things end sooner with everything going on, like it's not that big of a deal to me. Before we get into like into some of the newer stuff going on, I always like to ask everybody I talk to how they got into comics. What were some of their first?
I got into comics when I was really little because my dad owned a newsstand. They like just sold it this year in Pennsylvania. And, when I was really little, he would bring comics home for me, and it was so cool. I was reading like Harvey comics and like just really cute shit, and I loved it. And I feel like that was what taught me how to read because I was a like idiot savant for a really long time. I feel like I could read, but like I was really quiet and I was really shy. And there was just something about comics that I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense to me. And I don't know, I just feel like my life really came together after I started reading comic books. And so they've just been like a huge part of my life ever since. When I was a teenager, we had a really great shop in my town. I'm from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And we had a really great shop called Dreamscape Comics, which RIP, like miss that store. But they would stock like, your like regular stuff, but then they also stocked like alternative and like manga. And I was in heaven, like as a teenager, like going there after school with my like little like goth friends. Like I loved it. So it just stayed in my life forever. And then I went to college, and I really wanted to study art. Like I wanted to, do visual arts. And my parents, they like own a newsstand. They're like, I don't think so. Like you're the first one to like go to college. Like you have to study something and like get a job. And I was like, okay. So I studied art history because I really wanted to like work in museums. And then my goal became I wanted to get a master's in art history and learn French and write like a thesis about Barbarella comics. It was really like convoluted. Then like halfway through grad school, I was like, I just would rather like draw these all the time. And so that's basically me now. It's where I'm at. Yeah.
And who were some of your biggest influences?
Oh my God. Well, definitely all the Harvey comics. Huge fans still. I think they're so adorable and they're so easy to read. Like that, not even just in terms of like, literacy, which like I could still always use a little help there, but just like the expressions and like how relatable all the characters were and like just how adorable they were, like it's so appealing. So I loved those. When I was in high school, I was like really going through it, and I loved Sam Keith. I loved the
Yes.
Max. I still love the Max. I actually got it and I started rereading it for the first time since I was a teenager in quarantine, and like, wow.
It's funny you say that. I read it for the first time in quarantine. I had never read it, and I went back. Well, the Kayfabe channel is partly to blame for all of my comic book spending during quarantine.
Sure.
But I ended up discovering a lot of stuff that I didn't know about, and that was one of them. So I think it's cool that you brought that up. But I'll
Yeah.
continue. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, that's really cool. Like it's been wild to revisit that stuff because I didn't realize it at the time, but it was kind of like my intro to like Jungian psychoanalysis and like the idea of archetypes and the idea of like a subconscious and all of these things that are really important to me in my work now. Like I didn't really trace just how influential that was until recently. So that was really cool. But I love that. I love Dave Cooper, this comic called Ripple. I don't know if you know that one.
I know Dave Cooper. I don't know Ripple though.
It's so nasty and it's really explicit and disgusting. And I was reading it when I was a teenager in the like adult section of the comic store. Big influence, loved it. It came out recently in a reprint from Fantagraphics, and it got an epilogue or introduction by David Cronenberg. It's like the
Oh
sickest.
wow. Oh.
It's cool. Loved that, and then I loved manga because I was like watching anime on TV after school, and then I was like running to the comic book store and like picking up Gundam Wing or whatever because that was the coolest.
And then, so as after you decided to become a cartoonist, that's what you wanted to do. Was Nurse your first project, or was there something that preceded that?
I was doing all these like goofy, dumb little comics because I went to Syracuse University and they have a daily student newspaper. It's kind of, I don't know if they still do, but it's kind of unusual in that like every single day, like a newsprint paper, which was major, and they like had a comics page. And so I was doing stuff for that. Fucking abysmal. Like I hope I never see it again. So bad. But I was doing that. Nurse was really the first one that I was like, I want to make like a comic book. And it's so wild because like the first few pages in it are like some of the first like comics pages that I ever really drew. They're from like 2007. I see them now and they like physically hurt me. But yeah, that was the first like major thing, and it took so long. Like I finished it in like 2010, 2011. But it was really like the training ground for everything I'm doing now.
And you self-published that?
I did. I self-published it. Oh my God, it came out in like 8 issues. It was cuckoo. I was always at Kinko's. It sucked. Everyone thought that I worked there. I was printing them. I was trimming them. I was selling them at shows. I was selling them online. And I still do that. I don't go to Kinko's anymore. I have like a nice vendor that I work with. But yeah, that was like really good training for everything that was to come.
And that led into Ad House with Operation Margarine Next, correct?
Yes, yeah. Ad House was Sparkplug Comics did put out the Nurse collection in
Oh, okay.
2012. Yeah. So I did still have like a publisher for that, but then Ad House felt like you know, had, I think like bigger distribution, and, you know, it was just like working one-on-one with Chris Pitzer, who's so awesome. I love Chris. Yeah, that felt like really major.
And how did you go from, you went from self-publishing, then you went to Ad House, and then you ended up at Fantagraphics, who has now become has superseded so many other publishers as one of my favorites. How did that feel to land there, and was that like kind of a goal for you?
They didn't want me. I lord that over them all the time. Eric Reynolds, who's their associate publisher, who has been the I'm sorry, associate publisher. He's been the editor, excuse me, on My Pretty Vampire, the agency, and now Maids. And I've done pretty well for Fantagraphics, and I always am just like, remember when you said no? He claims he doesn't, but I have the email thread. No, I'm just kidding. It was always like, it was always a goal for sure, and it seemed always out of reach because I didn't follow the sort of like normal path into comics. I didn't study art. I didn't really study comics. It was always something that I was like learning as I went. And so when I finally did get in, I felt like, oh my God, like this is, what do I do now? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt really, really good. And it still feels really good. You know, Maids like looks great. I'm already talking about what I want to do next with them. I'm so like lucky and happy that I have this relationship with them.
Nice. Yeah, I can't wait to have the actual book in my hand. Because
Thank you.
I don't mind reading PDFs, you
Mhm.
know, so that I can talk to creators and so that I can, or reviews, but there's nothing like having that book in your
I,
hand, you know?
oh,
And I'm a sucker for hardcovers too,
nice.
so.
You want to see?
Oh
No,
man.
and it looks so sick. I'm really
Yeah, the
excited.
design of it is great. Even on, and you know what? I will say this before I ask my next question. The PDF didn't take away from the way like just the red like on the page and then the break in the chapters like it was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, yeah. So your art style was definitely like, and not just yours, but like some of the other cartoonists that I've started following within the last, I don't know, 6 months, right? Is a departure definitely from like what I usually read, maybe Marvel, DC. I've definitely moved very far away from that kind of stuff lately, and I was wondering, how did you develop that specific style? Like, were there any like specific creators that kind of influenced that? And like, especially like the way your storytelling and your pacing, you really let the art tell the story. Like, there's many pages where there's no dialogue, but you know exactly what's going on, and you feel that emotion or that feeling come through in each specific panel.
Mhm. Thank you. I think a lot of that came from reading manga when I was still like when my brain was still forming. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
I didn't really read mainstream like big two comics, and I kind of still really haven't. I do want to get into Batman, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, I think it was just kind of like getting really into manga, and also that kind of foundation of those Harvey comics, and just being able to be like, I can read these expressions, even if I don't know what else is going on, even if like my semblance of language isn't there yet. I know like when someone's upset or when someone's being silly or whatever. And so I think a lot like that was the foundation for it. And then I love like feel bad French movie. That's my favorite genre. And I love movies where like people are just like not communicating, but you know how much they like hate each other or like how miserable they are. Or you're able to like project that onto them and be like, this is great storytelling. But it's just kind of like, how much of this is me projecting? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I like that kind of storytelling. And I think there's just like, there's so much room. I think I like to let people bring their own conclusions to what's going on too. I don't like to hit people over the head and be like, "Do you see exactly what's happening here? Like, do you get it?" I like to kind of trust the reader and let them bring what they want to it. So yeah, that manga, you know, decompression of action, just kind of seeing things happen slowly over time, as opposed to like a huge splash page where a million things are happening at once. Like I would definitely prefer the decompression sort of route.
And then, I feel like I should ask this before I ask you this question. I kind of know what the Harvey comics are, but maybe not everybody listening or watching knows. Harvey comics are like Casper and Wendy the Witch, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
The best. Wendy the Witch, so cute. Yeah. There was also like a little devil
Oh
guy.
yes, yes, I remember. I remember that character too.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to revisit those during quarantine the same way that I revisited the Mac, but they're out there. You can find them.
And then so the current book that we're here to talk about is Maids, and that drops in October,
Hmm.
correct? Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, Maids is my exploration of the true crimes of the Pepin sisters, who were two sisters in France who worked as maids for like an upper middle class family, the Lancelot family, in the late 20s. And they, on February 2nd, 1933, they murdered the mother and daughter of the family in one night in a really gruesome sort of barbaric way that some people read that it was satanic, some people read that it was folie à deux, where like they were acting of the same mind. So the story follows them from their time arriving at the Lancelot house in the late 20s up until the night of the murder in 1933.
Like I love stories that are based on true events, like books, film, everything. Like I was wondering, what about that particular story made you say, "Man, I want to do a graphic novel on that"?
I really hate working. I don't want to do it anymore. And I just really related to them in that way because no, that sounds really bad. But I I I've had a lot of, I've lived in New York for going on 13 years. I've had a lot of different jobs here, and I've had a lot of different experiences, and some have been really, really negative. And I always like to explore sort of dark areas in my comics that I don't get to explore in my life because I would never act out in a way that would be violent or kind of betray my own safety or my own sanity. And so I'm attracted to these kinds of stories. And there was something about the fact that they were sisters, that they had been separated for a long time, that, everything I was reading was kind of like they had this codependent sort of relationship. They had, mental health issues. They had their own language issues. I've read accounts that they were illiterate. So there was so much there, and it's been adapted. The story has kind of been adapted and explored in a lot of different ways. The biggest outlier would be Jean Genet's play *The Maids*, which was loosely based on it, but it's so fantastical that the facts aren't really there. It's not really so much about this specific case as like this dynamic between the maids and the family.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's also, there are a lot of like 50s and 60s movies about the case as well that are very over the top, very campy, which I think, are wonderful in their own right. But I really wanted to get into something that was going to be closer to their kind of internal experience. And I just wanted to see, like, how do you get from point A to point B? How do you get from, we're working with this family to we're killing them in like an hour, So it was just so baffling and so crazy. And the murders themselves are so gruesome that you're like, horror vacui. Like I can't look away from it. So yeah, that was my end.
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty crazy. I mean, I knew it was gonna happen, but as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, when is gonna be the thing that sets them off? And then boom, all of a sudden, I was like, oh shit, all right. Um, so it being a true story, how extensive was the research that went into this? Did you travel over there at all, or was it all?
I wish that I had. Hopefully I always end up kind of going to things after the fact. Like when I was doing Nurse, I really wanted Mars to look like Iceland. And then I didn't end up going to Iceland until like a year after it was published. And I was like, oh yeah, I did a good job. And that's just kind of been my thing for some reason. It always happens too late, but I'm like, oh yes, like I proved my thesis, like good for me. Um, But yeah, I didn't get the chance to travel. I do have my very like rudimentary French that I had, that I was working on in grad school, but that didn't really end up mattering because so many of the texts that I was reading about, that I was using for research were so theoretical and like so philosophical, like, Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir writing about, the murders. I'm like, that's not really useful to me.
Mhm.
Knowing kind of the cultural, like, psychological impact is not really as interesting to me as like, well, what happened that night? What was the dynamic between the mother and daughter, and therefore like the sisters? So I really had like one solid text that was just a collection of essays that some of it did like veer off into the sort of theoretical, but then there were also like some pretty good accounts of like, at least, here's what we know that happened that night. So yeah, I really didn't have too many sources on this. And there are so many conflicting accounts. Like even if you do your own sort of cursory search about the Pepin sisters, you'll get a ton of conflicting information. Even just their ages, their birthdays, the dynamics. A lot of people like to speculate that they themselves had like a sexual relationship, which I don't really buy. I didn't really find anything that would have confirmed that. And so it was really a matter of like just knowing the bones of the case and then bringing my own sort of experience to fleshing out the rest.
Do you have a follow-up project for this, or an insight, or answer that, and then I'll ask the other
Uh,
one.
for me, no, I don't. I tend to like to just do one project at a time, and when it's done, it's done.
Mhm.
I've tried going back, and I've tried to like write a sequel to My Pretty Vampire like a few times, and it's just like no, it's kind of like a fever that takes me and then it leaves. So I like to reinvent what I'm doing every single time because I like that challenge. There are a few things that I'm thinking about now, and I'm always very reticent to talk about those because I'm so superstitious. But the things that I'm thinking about are still kind of in line with like exploring things that really happened.
Is it safe to say that you would like to do more stories through events?
I would. I like getting into characters in this way, and it does kind of take the pressure off a little bit to have people come to a story with their own sort of their own research and their own understanding of it. That either you prove wrong, or you meet their expectation, or you don't. In a way, I think that that's kind of the way that like the public engages with art now. I think it's easier to have, sort of your own preconceived ideas before you come into something. I don't know if that's good or bad. It just kind of seems to be the way that things are right now.
And you spoke briefly at the beginning that you did a Kickstarter for the tarot, the oracles, the tarot cards and stuff. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how doing that kind of is a different creative outlet than say just because I know you illustrate each card, but how is that different from like doing a graphic novel?
In some ways it's like way more of a pain in the ass because you know that people are going to be using it for like a certain purpose. So when I did the tarot deck, it was like I had to make sure that I was nailing all of the symbolism for all 78 cards because like I wasn't going to do a guide, because I'm like I'm not qualified to like write about tarot. I think I've been doing it forever and I still feel like I'm not qualified. So that was like a lot of work. In a way, I'm like, maybe I could do mainstream stuff because at least I'm like, I know that like I can tap into symbols and like make things readable. So I'm like, maybe that is something that's not out of my wheelhouse as much as I think that it is. But the Oracle deck was different from even the tarot deck because it's like now I have to make up my own symbols and I have to make up my own coda for everything. And I have to figure out how do these read when you pull them in reverse. What would they relate to if you were pulling them for like a love drawing or like a fortune drawing or whatever? And I have to think of all of these different things. And I have to make sure that I'm writing this guide in a language that isn't like super academic and like not accessible. So yeah, that was actually like, I was like, this is gonna be a fun, little thing. And it was like, 3 or 4 months of work and like bringing in, copy editors and, different vendors to try to like assemble all the pieces. But in a way, it was really fun too, because it's like, it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, I'm checking off boxes, like I have XYZ things done. I don't have to consider every single like millimeter of it like I would if I was laying out a comics page.
Yeah. And that's through Kickstarter. And I wanted to ask this question as well, especially with the kind of the state of comics. I know Fantagraphics is a little bit different because they distribute like different avenues than just the direct market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about releasing projects through Kickstarter as well, or are you exclusively going to continue with Fantagraphics?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I really like my relationship with Fantagraphics, and at this point, I don't know that I have the capacity to manage my work as both like a publisher and a distributor and the artist and the writer. It's a lot. Excuse me. I mean, I never say never to anything. I have been thinking about releasing comics through Patreon as like kind of a subscription model. But
Yes, do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the nature of it is, it's just like, I'm not, I feel like I'm a pretty consistent worker, but I can't say that like I can guarantee a new comic every single month, just like the semi like unhinged circumstances of my life. It's not actually that bad, but it's just really hard to like manage everything on top of that. But I mean, who knows? Like, we are entering a brand new economy in a brand new universe. I can't say anything for sure. I just never say never to anything, really.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, like for me as like a fan, I think Kickstarter is cool because you get to interact. I feel like it's a little bit more interactive with the creator, and Patreon as well. I think is really awesome. I know that there's a few hip hop artists that I follow on there, and then obviously I follow Piscor and Jim Rugg. So yeah, I think if you do it, I think that would be kind of awesome. Maybe every 2 months, every 3 months, you say you get a little mini comic or something would be really cool.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. I'm gonna keep thinking about it. I mean, yeah, it's like I'm gonna have my work cut out for me in the next few weeks of like packing up all these Oracle decks and like
Hmm.
shipping them. But I'm even the other day, it's like, I was just between things and I'm just like, I'm bored. Like, I need something new to do. Like, I need to be like overstimulated all the
Yeah.
time. It's just, I don't know. It's the name of the
Yeah.
game.
And if anything, it's just a cool way for you to be able to interact with your fans because we can comment and message. I think that I didn't realize that you could do that with Patreon. I
Mhm.
think before, I don't know, for whatever reason, I just didn't do it. I think Ed Piscor doing the Red Room thing was what got me to jump in there. And I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, it's very interactive. And you can message the creators, you can comment and all this kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool.
That is cool. I should try that.
Yeah. And then, so something I talked about with another creator is, I've noticed that not only has female readership, female creators, like it's grown in comics. It's definitely not where I think it should be. Um, but what do you think was kind of like, or what do you think continues to be the catalyst to see this growth in comics? And what do you think needs to continue in order for it to grow and maybe get to where it should be, to where it is equal and it's not just mostly male dominated?
That's hard for me to say because I don't feel like I was ever like the only girl in the room. I
Mhm.
always thought that there were a lot of women in comics. I think maybe the marketing wasn't always there, or just sort of like the spotlight wasn't always necessarily there. But I feel like we've always kind of been here, and I also feel
Yeah,
like leadership has always been there too. Maybe not necessarily in Marvel and DC, but I mean, I think that it's there for that. Maybe it's, I don't really know off the top of my head, to be honest. But I mean, manga was such a major thing. It was like all of me and all of my girlfriends were like into it in high school, and I feel like that is so accessible, and it's more kind of fan friendly in a way too. But I really don't know. I just don't want the like scarcity myth to continue where it's like, oh, there's only room for one woman to like work on dot dot dot. You know, like I don't want the idea to be that like, oh, right now we're like just celebrating this woman in comics or like next month it'll be this woman. It's like we're here all the time, you know? So I don't even really want to be like a woman in comics. I'm just like I'm an artist and this is the medium that I'm working in and you know, I don't really like care how I'm celebrated and read as long as I'm celebrated and read. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm like, I don't really know. I guess I'm just kind of like I'm not really clear on what the problem is, so I don't really have an idea as to how to fix it because to me it feels like we're here, you know?
Yeah, I guess maybe for me it's just like growing up, there was no friends that I had that were girls that read comics, you know? So like I didn't ever experience that. I think working at a shop, I definitely see the readership way more and I can kind of I see what, they gravitate towards. It's not the superhero stuff. It's mostly indie. You know, maybe that's why maybe I didn't pay attention enough to indie. I know like for me, um like just you say like women have always been there. Like for me, like the only editors that I ever paid attention to in comics, and maybe this is wrong, were Karen Berger and Shelley Bond.
Mm-hmm.
Those two names have always stood out to me, and I always followed their work. You know, when Karen left Vertigo and she went and did Berger books at Dark Horse, and Shelley Bond did her Blackground.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just thought I'd ask and kind of get your opinion on it, just because like I don't see it, or I didn't see it growing up, so I was just wondering how do we continue to like, because I try with my daughter, don't get me wrong, like I try to push comics on her. She kind of gravitates more towards like the art, with my wife because my wife's a artist.
Well, I guess I mean I do feel like there have been maybe like you said roles that were not that were kind of like facilitating the form that weren't necessarily like as artists as writers that do kind of it, not that it's a consolation prize or anything because obviously those are difficult and necessary jobs but to me I'm just kind of like I want to be like a woman who you know writes draws I do all of my own stuff like I design you know when I put out my mini comics like I design them I print them I take them to shows like I don't I don't ever want to be in a role that's just kind of like I'm facilitating the form even as I say that like I'm actually editing my first book next year which is going to be really cool
Oh, awesome.
yeah it'll be an art book it's like adjacent to comics so it's kind of different but I'm just kind of like I think that I don't want to take anything away from those positions, but I'm kind of like, I just want there to be equal sort of representation in terms of like the ideas that go into comics and not just facilitating other artists that make them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely, and I think maybe, you know what, as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing maybe this misconception of there's not female readership, female creators, right? It's because of Marvel and DC. Because at Marvel, you don't see the representation there. It's not, I don't even think it's like 30%. You know, and I think that's it's a huge, I don't know the right word to say, but I just think I basically think it's fucked up. You know what I mean? I don't know how else to say it other than it's fucked up, and that I like that I can show my daughter, especially like, oh look what she did, so that she can aspire to do stuff like that. And I just wish that Marvel and DC would kind of get in line with the times instead of where they try to be, quote unquote woke.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, you know what I mean? Like it feels like sometimes it feels like they I don't know. I can't think of what I'm
I,
trying to say.
I think I get you. I think they are kind of maybe getting in their own way. And, you know, the last time that I really paid attention to what was going on with Marvel was in like 2013, 2014, when the Manara Spider-Woman cover what caused like this huge kerfuffle because I was like, I'm a big Manara fan. I thought it was sick. I was like, I don't know anything about Spider-Woman, but like this looks awesome. And everyone was so mad at it. And I was like, what am I like missing here? Like this
Yeah.
looks beautiful. I love these colors. This is like the first time I've been interested in like a Spider-Woman book, maybe ever. And I just thought it was so cool. And people were so mad. And I was like, you're not really like landing one for like the cause by being mad at this. Like you're telling a conglomeration how you want to be marketed to. And I think that that kind of like skewed what they've been trying to do for the last like 6 years or whatever by canceling that. I'm like, that really should have come out. Like, I want
Yeah.
that. Did it come out?
I don't know. I know exactly what you're talking about. It was a great cover,
So
but
sick.
they're scared. They're scared of pushing boundaries, and I think that that's something that it's especially as I'm getting I want to say as I'm getting older, but like as I start paying attention more to that kind of stuff, it just like makes me like, well, I don't really want to read your stuff because you are just going to recycle the same old ideas. You're not really changing anything. I mean, you remember I'm sure you heard about the Batman comic that Azzarello and Lee Bermejo did, where it was the Black Label and they showed his thing.
Oh yeah, they showed his Dingle Donger. Yeah, I remember that.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, that came out and oh shit, no, we can't do that. It's like, well, what do you mean? Like it wasn't like sexualized, number one. Number two, it was a mature label. What
Yeah.
is the big deal? And what did they do? They the next two issues took forever to come out because they had to probably edit the shit out of them. And it's just stuff like that. I think people should just read more indie. I mean, that's all I recommend at the shop to people is usually not to say that I don't. If they ask me about stuff, I'll be like, okay, read this, read that, or whatever. But I try to steer people towards indie because I think that what you and other cartoonists are doing with comic books, there's just way more passion in it. And it's just the experience you get from it is different. And I would much rather support a creator where I feel like I'm almost more directly supporting them as opposed to like whatever page rate Marvel and DC want to give their creators.
Sure, for sure. I think, I mean, I can't necessarily speak to the fact that like the material conditions are better on the indie side. I think they're kind of bad for everybody except maybe like, two or three people in both industries, which is a bummer. But yeah, I just really like having that freedom. And that's another reason that I really am so grateful that I'm with Fanta because I've never been told no. And I'm, the day that like an editor somewhere else tells me like, this is too dot dot dot, like that's going to be a really bad day for me. So I'm trying to avoid that.
So, I kind of want to ask that because I can definitely see editing in mainstream, right? I can tell I'm like, oh, that must have been an editorial decision. That doesn't seem like the writer wanted to go that route.
Mhm.
What kind of editorial control or what kind of like what role do they play in like Fantagraphics? Because like, do they kind of, for the most part, let you do your thing, and it's or like, yeah, what role do they play in your work?
Um, with Eric, with Eric Reynolds, it's always been just kind of like he'll edit me for visual clarity at times, but he's never come in and said, this doesn't make sense. I don't like this. Can you change this dress to dot dot dot? Like he's very hands off. I think with Fanta, in my case, I can't speak to everyone, but they just want to make sure that your book and your idea is making the best possible case for itself in the world. And so really the most like back and forth that I've had with them has been on design and layout and, hardcover, softcover, the sort of press release, like those kinds of things. But they've never come back and Eric wasn't like, hey, can you like draw less eyeballs? Like never, so that's really, really grateful for that.
And you were saying also you do everything. You color, you letter.
Well,
How do
thank
you
you.
how do you tackle or what do you tackle first? Do you tackle the art and then this like as you're laying out each page?
Mhm.
Do you already have the whole script written or do you draw it and then because the idea is in your head, so like you already know what you're doing, right? So do you just draw it and then you fill in and then you letter it after, or do you script it out?
I have a very loose script for all the stories that I do. And the reason that I don't necessarily block everything out is because you never know what you will invent like the day of that you're actually working. And I don't want to deny that. What I have been doing is recently is like when I'm thinking about a story, I, you know, kind of like setting apart a few days for myself or hours for myself in a day, I should say, to think about it. And I'm kind of like writing the story out in my head. And then I don't write things down. I'll like give myself 24 hours and then come back to it again. And it's like, if I don't remember what I was thinking about the day before, it wasn't good enough. You know, like if it sticks in my mind, that means that it's like serious and it's worth doing. So that's been my approach to writing for a while, like this kind of 24-hour thing.
Mm.
And so I'm writing out like a very loose outline of like, you know, I knew Maids was going to come out in issues. And so I'm like, issue 1, I have to establish ... Issue 2, I have to establish ... And so it's just kind of building the story around these like big points that I want to hit, either in print, like as mini comics, or, you know, if I was just doing it for myself, that's how it would work. So I have my like loose script outline. And then when it comes to like drawing the actual page, I'm like at my desk with I recently started working on 14 by 17, which is gigantic. I outline the panels because like I'm just kind of figuring out how am I going to tell, you know, how does it get from this point to this point by the end of the page. And then I have dialogue that I've written down, but that might change if it feels like, oh, you know what, I actually kind of drew her like looking away. So it might be more interesting if she said this in like a passive voice than that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of feeds into their dynamic. So it's just thinking about it all the time, which is why I'm like, it's exhausting. It takes forever to do a good job, I think. And yeah, it feels like it's different every single time, but it's really kind of not. It's really just that process all over again every day.
When you're drawing, do you have music in the background or do you need complete silence? And if you do listen to music, what music do you listen to?
I've actually been listening to a lot of podcasts lately, just because with like stuff with the Oracle deck, it's like, well, I'm kind of on autopilot because I'm not thinking as much as I am with comics. Um, with drawing comics, I actually do work better in total silence, but I won't. I'm always denying myself that. I'm like, no, like, don't you want to listen to like Can or like Amon Duel or like Mozart? And then I kind of like overstimulate my brain. And I'm just like, I can't do anything now. But yeah, I should work in silence, but I don't. I listen to, I love krautrock. I love anything that's really like rhythmic. I listen to a lot of electronic. I really like Aphex Twin. I find that that's been really great to work to. Yeah, but I can't really do anything that's like, I can't do rock. I can't do like pop music. I just get too like taken out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are some of the creators or books that you are following or excited about right now?
Oh my God. Okay, I have a stack of them like right in front of me. I don't have my glasses. Okay, there's this book called Magician A that just came out from Beguiling Press. It's by a manga artist whose name I can't read because it's upside down. But she's really great. It's a really like nasty collection of short stories where everything is so grim and so bleak and like ironic and painful. Big fan. Let's see. I just read another book. I got a bunch of stuff from this publisher called Silver Sprocket. Silver Sprocket. The other book I got was called Girl in the World by Caroline Cash. I really liked that. Um, Otherwise, what else am I reading? I feel like I just got a big collection of John Willie comics, who is like a fetish, like bondage fetish artist, who also did a lot of comics. Really been enjoying that because they're so psychotically detailed. And it's very obviously not about the narrative. Like, that's not the important part. So I love that. Yeah, just kind of all over the place. And then just rereading the Max. Like, you know, but as far as creators I'm excited about now, of course, Jaime. I think I like Eleanor Davis. I love
She's
Julia
great.
Graffer. Julia Graffer is sick. She has a book coming out from Fanta in like a couple weeks or so called Vision. I'm really excited for that. God, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. I just got Jim Rugg's book.
Ah, I'm still waiting on that, man.
Maybe it's like an East Coast thing. I got it faster, but that looks really sick. I don't have a black light. I guess I gotta like buy one or like get a friend. I don't know. But I love that. These drifting classroom collections that are coming
Oh
out.
yeah, I've seen
Luminous,
those.
sick, right? Like I would highly recommend those. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. Me, of course,
Yeah.
should be at the top of everyone's list at all times. So that's gonna be sick. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming out.
Awesome. Yeah. I like asking that just for selfish reasons, mostly for myself, so I can learn about some new stuff. So before we get out of here, I just want to ask a couple more questions. So I know you said that you're still working on the Oracle stuff, but what else is on your drawing board right now? What else are you working on?
I started, I'm always really like hesitant to talk about things that are still formulating, but I will say that I've become really, it might just be quarantine, but I've become really obsessed with Heidi Fleiss, who, former Hollywood madam and now kind of like lives in squalor in a trailer with like two parakeets or macaws. She's really into like parrots. And I'm like, that's really fascinating. So I've been drawing her and her parrots a lot. We'll see what comes of that. I've also been really obsessed with the Amy Fisher story. So I've been drawing her. So I don't know. I might be like veering in that direction. I might just have like a fanzine coming out. I really don't know. I really don't know, but nothing major right now. Just kind of like feeling around.
Okay, cool. And then before we get out of here, any last words that you want to share with Maids, and then where can we find you online?
I think that Maids is the best thing I've ever done. I hope that people will really enjoy it. I hope that people who hate their job should definitely get this book. People who are cleaning should definitely get this book. I I think it's the closest that I've ever come in my life to creating poetry because I would never sit down and write a poem, but I feel like this one is really close to it really cuts to like the bone in terms of what I want to do in comics now. And so I'm very proud of it. I hope people will enjoy it. And people can find me. My website is katieskellycomics.com. And then I'm on Twitter, but I only use Twitter to like say cryptic things and like it's not good. I'm not good at it. So follow me on Instagram and my @ on there is Skelly, Skelly, Skelly.
All right, cool. And thank you so much again for doing this. It was a lot of fun and definitely want to do this again next time. You have
Yeah,
another project to talk about for sure.
thank you so much. And yeah, your channel's awesome. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.
All right, you too.